Hello, this is Dave Michaels, and I'm here with Zeus Kerravala. How you doing, Zeus?
Hey, Dave. How's it going?
Haven't seen you in days.
Days? Yeah, literally days.
Yeah. Zeus and I spent several days in Las Vegas recently at the Cisco Live event. That was my first Cisco Live. I've been to the Collaboration Summit many times, but that's my first Cisco Live. I think you're probably a fixture there.
I've been to a few.
Yeah. So is there anything that is remarkably different about this Cisco Live that I wouldn't have noticed?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's bigger. That's for sure. When I started going over there were maybe 10,000 people. Now I think they said there's 28,000 people in the audience.
It was like three hotels in Vegas, or at least three hotels. I don't even know.
Yeah, that arena they had was pretty full as well. So it seems like they were busting at the seams even where they were. So certainly the audience of people that care about Cisco enough to go to the show has grown, right? And then I think that's certainly a testament to the breadth of their portfolio today.
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise for me because I know Cisco Collaboration pretty well, but I don't know the rest of Cisco pretty well. And so there was so much going on there that it was really surprising. I mean, it was a pretty big event. Let me ask you, what do you think the Vegas venue is a good place for that? Because there's so much distraction and the bussing around. I asked them how they were getting the executives around because the executives had pretty tight schedules. And we were mostly at the Bellagio. I think the big event was at Mandalay Bay. I think I heard there was stuff going on at the MGM. And they said they were using taxis, which just completely surprised me because it just takes so long to get anywhere. Do you think Vegas is a good place for that?
Well, they move it around, right? It was in San Diego the year before. I think there's better venues. I think San Diego is a better venue than Vegas. Not that I'm a big fan of Orlando. I think Orlando's a better location just because you can have everybody self-contained. Even if you want to have multiple hotels in San Diego, there's a couple of hotels right down the street. So Vegas is a weird, there's no city that holds more people for a conference than Vegas does, but it's also highly distributed. There's a lot of distractions, as you said.
Yeah.
People tend to stay out fairly late and get to sessions late as well.
Get to sessions late, but that's the IT crowd as well.
Yeah.
So what did you think of the mood at this event? I mean, so just to clarify, Zeus and I were mostly at the Bellagio. They call that event CSCape or Cisco. I don't know. It's CSCape, and that was more geared toward analysts. And then they have the Cisco Live event, which is more geared toward customers and partners. Taking place at the Mandalay Bay. So we didn't have a lot of interaction with partners unless we kind of made it happen, or customers. And did you get a sense of the mood of things compared to other Cisco Live events?
Yeah, I thought the mood was fairly upbeat. I think it's certainly broader, right? That was one of the big things historically. In fact, the event used to be called Networkers, right, which showed you it was primarily a network audience. But it seemed that when you look at the list of sessions on the Cisco Live website, there was more business-level sessions. There was more around the area of analytics, programming. So I think the mood was upbeat. And I have never seen a World of Solutions area as big as this one, Dave. Typically, if you had been to one 5-6 years ago, you would have seen a very, very small solution showcase, and it was primarily network management vendors and things. But the breadth of companies that Cisco has as an ecosystem now it was almost as big as the Interop World of Solutions.
Yeah. Actually, I found that kind of frustrating. I wish I'd known it was going to be that big because they didn't give us a whole lot of time in there. The time that they officially gave us in there was in the Cisco booths, and I didn't get a whole lot of time. I skipped a session and went back to the expo hall. And I got to spend some time with some great partners, including IBM, which had a pretty big presence there. Did you get much of a chance to go through the expo hall?
I did not. I snuck away from our tour that we were supposed to be there. So hopefully the AR people don't, if they watch this, they don't get too upset. But it was tough, right? It was so big, and the one area that I never got to go anywhere near was the DevNet zone, which was around the corner from the World of Solutions, and I heard that was almost as big as the World of Solutions itself, and that was
my gosh,
that's mostly developers. So the size, like I said, the size of exhibitors and the things customers can see and look and feel and touch has grown massively over the last few years. And again, I think it's it's a testament to how Cisco's grown, right? We're not just looking at routers and switches.
So the reason I'm asking you about mood and I guess really about the mood and how the event was different was because this was the Chuck Robin era officially, right? Now I didn't go last year. I almost went last year. There was a conflict that I couldn't get out of. But last year you had John and Chuck as the passing of the baton event. This was Chuck's first, all him. He did. John's not there. He did the keynote. He did the tours. We got to spend some time with him, which was great. So, do you think there's any distinguishing characteristics of the Chuck Robbins era of Cisco that is clearly different, or has it been a pretty smooth transition?
I think it's been a smooth transition, but clearly this is Chuck's company now, and he's put a stamp on it. Last year's keynote was a little strange, actually, Dave, because it was almost a farewell to John. They played a lot of
appropriate. I'd say that's appropriate.
A lot of John Chambers retrospect videos. It was very emotional. I mean, you could tell the crowd. Cisco customers love Cisco and they love John Chambers, and rightfully so. He listens to them. I think though, Chuck's a different guy. He's very straightforward. And I think people like that. And in fact, if you look at the management team he's put in this place, it's all his own people now. So
yeah,
this is Chuck's crew. He's going forward with it. He's a little more, like I said, he's a little more straightforward than John is, even when you ask him questions.
Well, exactly. John always struck me as a salesman first and then a CEO second. And Chuck strikes me as a CEO first. He's really direct and actually a bit more intimidating. I mean, if he gives you your full attention, you're kind of a little nervous about that.
Well, John was a great CEO. I think the difference is John was more of a gentleman, and the Southern gentleman, where Chuck's a street fighter, right? There's no problem too big to solve. If there's something getting in the way of a deal, he's going to fight his way through it. Where John would take the gentler approach, and where John would always say we don't focus on competitors, I think Chuck tends to focus more on competitors. And I think it's a different attitude at Cisco, and frankly, they're moving into an era where they need to be more competitive, right? In the John Chambers era, a lot of their competitors were the 3Coms, Nortels, Avayas, companies that really struggled to manage themselves, never mind compete.
Yeah.
And in this era, they're competing with VMware, Microsoft. There's a lot of big companies they're competing with that are as agile and as driven as Cisco.
Actually, another big difference is that this Cisco today competes with everybody. I mean, they used to just be a networking company, and they used to just compete with routers and switches. Even switches came late. But now Cisco's really competing with everybody, and it's kind of interesting how they view the world.
And they partner with everybody. I mean, VMware is one of the biggest competitors, and VMware was there on the show floor. So it shows that they're trying to manage those relationships a lot tighter.
Well, let's get into some of the content that we heard, some of the messaging we heard. I was surprised, actually, because again, I view or I correlate Cisco so tightly with collaboration, and I don't see the whole company as much as you do. I was surprised how much they messaged around machine learning, and they didn't really use artificial intelligence. They always referred to it as machine learning. Yeah. And I was also surprised how much they messaged about IoT. What was your take on the messages that you heard?
Yeah, well, IoT is something we should have expected. I mean, they've been one of the big thought leaders in IoT for the last 5 years. You're right, the machine learning was somewhat unexpected, although I think there's a tight correlation between machine learning and everything they do. And if you believe we're moving into a different era of IT, right? In this era, in this digital era, competitive advantage is determined by companies that can move fast. And in order to move fast, you need to have actionable insights that you can use. Well, where does that come from? That doesn't come from network administrators or IT administrators thumbing through pages and pages of log files trying to come up with some kind of actionable insight. It comes from machine learning or artificial intelligence, as you called it. And so I think machine learning can help you. They had a big security announcement around that. It can help you find threats faster. It can help you analyze data to be able to understand how to serve customers better. It can help you collaborate better, right? So I think there's a lot of implications to machine learning across the entire company. And so I think it's something that we should expect to see more of. In fact, I think when you look at all the acquisitions Chuck made, 15 this year, which was crazy, right? I don't remember a year even when Chambers acquired 15 companies. I would think going forward, you'll see more in that area. And as far as
Do you have the impression on machine learning that they're actually developing and owning their own machine learning technology? Because there's been some announcements with IBM Watson. They talked about Beery in his presentation talked about Google opening up TensorFlow into open source. Is Cisco going to be developing their own artificial intelligence capability, or simply using others? I shouldn't downplay that. I mean, applying the rules and logic behind every vertical or every implementation is unique. But do you think that they're actually going to be managing and creating their own AI or using others?
I think they'll use both. I think where it makes sense, like up the stack in the application area, they'll partner. In fact, they're doing that with Watson even. I think they will. I think down in the network area for security purposes, I think they'll develop their own. In fact, if you looked at the Tetration launch that they had a couple of weeks ago in New York, I believe that's all homegrown machine learning there as well. So, in the areas they have core competency, they'll do their own. And then the up the stack, they'll probably partner. Likely to move into some of that themselves, but they'll stick to their core. And by the way, I did want to make one more comment on IoT. I think the attitude there's changed, and Rowan echoed this in the summit we had, where they were very network focused with IoT a couple of years ago, but they seem to be much more big picture, much more application use case focused. And so the focus on manufacturing, automotive, digital experience, and digital cities is an indicator of that, where they're not thinking so much in the weeds and thinking more up the stack, which I think is a good thing.
You know what I find interesting or confusing about Cisco and IoT is you've got Rowan, who is basically in charge of IoT. I guess he's the SVP or whatever it is in charge of IoT. He has Jahangir, who was the founder of Jasper that came in, and he introduced him on the keynote. I went to the IoT keynote about as the head of IoT for all of Cisco, which was interesting. But then outside of Rowan's group, every part of the company is talking about IoT. And so it's organizationally, it spans everything as far as I can tell. In fact, the last day before I left Vegas, I went over to IoT Evolution, which was taking place over at Caesars. And I met with Cisco people who were telling me all about IoT and security, and they never even heard of Jasper. And so, I mean, IoT is, completely across the company, but yet you've got Rowan and Jahangir as somehow in charge of it, and it's confusing to me. It's not hierarchical like I would like it to be, but I guess that's just the nature of IoT. It's not.
Well, it's horizontal. In fact, I think it's the analogy I've used with. In fact, Inbar and I were talking about this at the last year's IoT World Forum. Is that the IoT to me is a lot like the concept of the internet. Right? It's not a thing, right? And in fact, if you remember 20 years ago, we used to have internet conferences. We don't have internet conferences today because it's an embedded part of what we do. I think IoT will be that way. I think 5 years from now, there will be no IoT World Forum or whatever IoT event you went to, because it gets embedded in everything we do. We connect things and we analyze things and we get insights. And so I think the reason you're seeing it that way is because the internet nobody can lead a company's internet strategy. It's part of everything you do.
Right.
So I look at our Rowan as being maybe heading up IoT software.
Yep.
The IoT strategy has to be pervasive across Cisco if it's going to be successful.
Yeah, and actually I really liked the way Rowan presented IoT. Yeah. He made two key points in his presentation, and I vehemently agree with both of them. One of them was that the IoT, the emphasis is really on the T, not the internet. To your point you just made, it's really about the things and the things becoming enchanted. And this is a term I've been using, and he's downplaying the internet, and I think that makes a lot of sense. It's the things, and then the second thing that he really played up was how these things become services and change business models and change business practices, connected services. And we're seeing that across Cisco. I mean, Cisco even said that you're moving away from selling standalone software. It's only recurring software they're moving toward. And when you change into a service model, everything changes. And I think people don't appreciate that. And what I like about that, and why I like Rowan being kind of in charge of this area, is we've seen this all before in telecom. Telecom used to be a UC, and PBX used to just be a product that you bought, and a lot of companies thought all they had to do was put it into a data center and call it a service and be in the UCaaS, and that was totally wrong. the technology in UCAS is the small part. It's the service model and the ongoing improvements and the operational aspects and all these things. And so that is where Rowan is putting his priority, is really around the service models and the processes around, and that's why Jasper was such a
one of the areas that you would echo to the conference, to me aside, which I echo as well, is I wish Rowan had talked more about the intersection of IoT and collab. Because if you think of IoT being machine to machine and collab being people to people, there's a tremendous amount of potential for IoT and collab to come together to do machine to people communications. I think that's going to be huge.
He won't talk about it. I've asked him, I've cornered him, I've talked to his staff about it. I asked him, what is his staff meeting like? I said, you got all this collab stuff going on the internet, and the IoT people must be bored, and vice versa. Yeah. And the answer I get back is they don't have staff meetings like that. They have collab meetings and they have IoT meetings. And he is effectively running it as two separate, he's a GM of two separate divisions. And he's vehemently, he's trying very hard not to blur these. And I think that probably requires quite a bit of discipline on his part, because that's not the way, I think, from my interaction with Rowan, that's not the way he's thinking. But I don't think he wants anyone to be confused. I think he wants to keep things clear and separate. And so, he's definitely got those separate. All right, let's move over to collab a little bit. Actually, before we get to collab, again, talking about how big Cisco is organizationally and how small collab is within that. Beery,
largest advanced technology.
What's that?
It's the largest advanced technology, so it's sizable.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they describe 7 pillars of their business. They described as, I got them here: network, next generation data center, service provider, security, collaboration, IoT, and analytics. Yeah. Again, my focus has really been around collaboration and increasingly around IoT. I don't know the network side as well as you do, and then the analytics side is fairly new. And so, when you look at those 7, where do you think the action really is? Where do you think Chuck's mindset is mind share is really at?
Well, I think it's hard to separate out any area and say it's got less action. I think the core is the key, though, is a lot of what you expect to see in the evolution of these areas is driven from the network up. Right? If you think of the experiences they can give in collab, they can give them because they own the network and they're able to control traffic flows and things to provide an outstanding experience. I think security, right? The whole security model has flipped to network as a sensor, network as an enforcer. So they're using network analytics to be able to find malware and then be able to quarantine it in a different part of the network. So all these trends are, you could argue, security, collab, IoT, and analytics are up the stack things from the network, even data center, but they're all Cisco's view into it is through the lens of the network. And even with collab, you can look at that as kind of the purest application they have, application play they have. But for every dollar they sell a collab, they pull through $3 to $5 of network sales. So success with collab equals success with networking, and it's hard to unlink the two. But I think where we might see some growth, I think obviously IoT is going to be big for them, and I think this is the best position they've been in security in a long, long time. I think they've historically had a hodgepodge of stuff, but it just wasn't tied together very well. And David Geckler has done a good job of tying that together. Data center is very competitive. I think service provider, they've got still some work to do. That whole market's going through transition itself, and as you said, they're new to analytics, so we'll have to see how they do there.
Yeah, the IoT thing is really interesting, and it surprisingly got quite a bit of attention in Chuck's keynote. And then, of course, it had a separate keynote from Rowan on IoT, which included Jahangir. I've met Jahangir. I've met the Jasper folks. I think it's a pretty confusing and misunderstood acquisition. Some of the statistics that Chuck shared in his keynote was he described Jasper as the largest commercially available IoT platform in the world. That's pretty significant. I'm not quite sure what criteria they're using that, but regardless, pretty significant. They announced that it has over 31 million connections currently. 1 million new devices a month are being added, and of those, 8 million of them are connected vehicles. So pretty strong momentum going.
Well, one of the problems with the whole concept of an IoT platform is everyone's got their own platform, right? Rockwell has a platform, Emerson has a platform. It's just not very well, SAP does, it's not very well defined. And I think and there is no single platform for everything, right? So this lets you manage connections, but if you want to manage analytics, you do that through HANA, right? And so I think that's one of the challenges that IoT has, is there's so many platform vendors that companies have to buy several of them in order to execute on their IoT strategy.
Yeah, Jasper's platform is really kind of a super carrier in a sense. They don't provide the carrier services. They manage them globally, which is a very interesting model. I've talked to some of Jasper's competitors, and a lot of them feel that it's better to have the network, and I can see why Jasper's gone without the network. So let's go over to Spark a little bit. For me, the Spark, there were some light bulbs that went off. Did any light bulbs go off for you around Spark? Was there anything that changed your attitude?
Well, Spark's the platform, right? Rowan has been working to this point where I don't care what they're doing to the other parts. Spark is their core platform they're going to be building on. It's the thing that connects all the devices today. It's going to be interesting to see how they manage the interoperability between Call Manager and Spark, but clearly Spark's the future for that company, not just from a client-facing standpoint, which is probably what most people know, but from a back-end cloud connectivity standpoint. That's the thing you're going to register all your devices to in the future. So,
yeah.
Did the event change your perception of Spark at all?
Well, what I find, I get a lot of questions from other people about Spark, and the question, basically, the most common question is are they getting any momentum? Do people like it? Is it going to fail? And I think they're legitimate questions. And what I came away from with this event is they're not legitimate questions. They're misunderstood. I don't think that people. I think what's happening is that people try to compare Spark to something. They compare to UC. They compare it to UC as a service. They compare it to CPaaS. And what I think they're missing is that it's everything, right? Spark is intended to be UCaaS, CPaaS, UC, video service, a video equipment story, and of course messaging, which is what most people just think it is. Yeah. And so there's all these things going on with Spark. And it's a priority, obviously. It's Rowan's priority. It's Cisco Collaboration's priority. It's where they're putting all their R&D. So one of the questions I get a lot is are they getting any momentum? And Cisco won't talk. They will not answer anything to do with how many users are using it. And I think the question is misguided after spending more time with Cisco this last few days, because Cisco is going to take everything that people are using, which includes WebEx, which includes Call Manager, which includes all their telepresence systems, which includes all their UC systems, their call managers, all their phones out there. And they're slowly making those Spark. So it's not a matter of people going to switch from what they have to Spark. Which is another pocket. It's really much more about how the entire installed base in the near future will effectively be on Spark.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's missed. That was the epiphany for me. It's not a matter of how quickly Cisco's ramping up. And then the other thing,
it's not a product, it's a platform, right?
That's just it. It's not even a platform. It's a platform, yes. It's also an application, yes. It's also a service. So it's all these things coming together. And I think, it's the elephant analogy where people, blind guys looking at an elephant. People keep looking at it, just one piece of it, and not realizing how much of this is in motion and how much of it is going to be very hard for competitors. In many ways, I think Cisco's taking over the industry, the collaboration industry's thought leadership, and that's kind of where Microsoft was probably about 5 years ago. Microsoft had really taken over at the time, I think it was Link. The Link concept of everything, of how UC was going to work, and the rest of the industry was more or less talking about trying to get things to be very similar, to follow the Link model, in many ways ahead of the Link model, but accepting that image. Now Cisco, I think, has kind of changed that and taking over the thought leadership by throwing in CPaaS into the UC story, by throwing in, now artificial intelligence, throwing in so many of these services into one story.
I actually it would have helped Cisco if they hadn't named the back-end platform and the product the same thing. If they had left the name Square or whatever and had the back-end, it might have been clearer to people, because when you have your back-end platform and your front-end client called the same thing, it can be confusing.
So I think I more or less asked this, but let me ask it more directly. So did you come away with any real big surprises? Either I mean, sometimes stuff that you're not allowed to talk about. So maybe those surprises are things that were announced. But did you come up with any big surprises in the collaboration space specifically that you want to talk about?
In the collab space specifically, probably just how big Spark is going to be for them. How it's literally become everything, right? Even with Tropo, which they bought for the CPaaS capability, they're the ones distributing the Spark APIs now, right? It's going through that channel. So Spark's the way, and if customers haven't looked at it and they're watching this, they should, because all their future products are going to be registering the Spark Cloud, and frankly, it's going to be a whole lot easier for them to use the Cisco stuff together. And I think that's maybe the biggest fundamental change they've had in the collab group is they've finally got one platform that drives everything, where before they had a bunch of them. So the Cisco on Cisco was difficult to manufacture, but now it should be much easier for them to create those experiences that delight, as Rowan likes to talk about.
Yeah, I think for me, one of my discoveries that I'm not quite sure if I've figured it out yet is the fact, or the secret, and I don't think it's a secret, is that they're actually using some Amazon services in the background on Spark. And we've seen this story before, where it used to be a premises-based server for UC services, and then it moved to virtualized services. And for a long time, we couldn't do real-time and virtualization. And, I guess that nut got cracked somewhere around 5 years ago, something like that. And all of a sudden, everybody started going virtualization. And now we've had that same thing where public cloud infrastructures, cloud services, have not been appropriate for real-time communications. And over the past couple of years, I would say, Avaya announced that they're doing stuff with the Google Cloud. Obviously, Interactive Intelligence is making a pretty big deal about doing stuff in the Amazon Cloud. That conversation is slowly changing. And
I think Circuit's in the Amazon too, right?
I'm actually not aware of Circuit being in an Amazon Cloud, but it wouldn't. I guess, but to my point, I guess to the point we're making here is that it wouldn't terribly surprise me. So I didn't realize that Cisco was using Amazon services for some back-end services, and that they've also kind of cracked that nut. And the way that it was explained to me, and I actually really like it, is they say that, look, there's a predictable load, and the predictable load is cheaper to run in our own data centers. And so they're running that in their own, they've got data centers globally running WebEx, running Spark, and running some other services. And then the non-predictable load, the peak load, they're setting off to other data centers, which may include Amazon, may include partners, may include other data centers. And they're saying that's the best of everything. They have the predictable stuff on the lowest cost, and then they can pick up on other people's services. And that was the first I'd heard about that. I've never heard anyone at Cisco talk about Amazon. And that's something that some other companies like Interactive have really been trumpeting. And so that to me was kind of a awakening, or a wake-up call. So we should wrap up here pretty soon. Let's see. I managed to get an update on their development fund. They announced last March. It was only a few months ago, but they announced at Enterprise they had a $150 million development fund. And we haven't heard much about it since March. I talked to Jason Gecki about it, and he indicated that, he indicated one is a 3-year program, so it's not $150 million the first year, but they are indeed spending money, and they're doing it in 3 different ways, and so far only one way. I don't know if you heard any of this. One way, the first way is the non-recurring one-time checks, typically $25K contributions to companies that have great ideas on Spark. That could go up to about $100K, and they have a process for vetting those. They are also looking to make equity investments in companies and startups. Mm-hmm. And most of the time in the last 2 months has gone towards setting up their review board and processes for evaluating those types of companies. And they're going to just start making those investments. Those will be up to like $250,000. Actually, I think they started at $250,000. And then they're just about to announce or launch an accelerator. They've been in the process of interviewing accelerators and trying to pick which one they want to go with. So lots of good progress going on there.
You know what's interesting about that model, though, Dave, is that I was talking with an equity analyst friend of mine this morning that he had the perception that Cisco's innovation machine was largely wrapped around M&A because they made 15 acquisitions in the first year of Chuck Robbins, which is just crazy. But in the roundtable I had with Chuck, he explained that. So that's part of it, right? So they're able to fund early startups and then be able to take advantage of that innovation. And what they're doing is they're taking the innovation expanding it out to the world of people to build stuff on Cisco. The other area that they're driving innovation from is internally. So Chuck was quoted in, I think, Bloomberg or Reuters or something saying that no more spin-ins, right? And in some ways he defended it. He said, I was misquoted saying that. What I was talking about was I'm not having dedicated people doing spin-ins. So if you're familiar with what happened, there was 4 people that whose initials were MPLS, right? So that's what people call them, that started 3 companies that Cisco funded and they bought back and they got very, very wealthy, creating some bad feelings inside Cisco. He's democratized that strategy now where there's an internal fund to help engineers with good ideas build products. If it gets to a certain level, then there'll be extra incentives for the employee and maybe even some stock wrapped around that. So from an employee perspective, I don't need to go to a startup to go do something cool or to even, really get paid, right? I can do it inside Cisco. And I have the security of having my job at Cisco, unlike going to a startup which may not be around in a couple of years. So a couple of the products they've already created through that innovation method were tetration, which I mentioned before, and the NSX 5500, which is deployed in data centers. So right away, they're seeing some innovation from that. And so I think historically they relied on just a core group of people to drive innovation. Now it's the entire company. If you've got some good ideas, they'll help you fund. And so between that and the external fund, we should expect to see much more innovation out of Cisco over the next few years.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That was a key part of Chuck's keynote. Yeah. And he spent half of the keynote basically explaining their innovation strategy, and he put it into 5 buckets. I didn't really understand the 5th bucket. Maybe you just touched on this, but the buckets were first build. Well, I'll just go through the buckets real quick. Build, buy, partner, invest, and co-develop. And so when I look at that, again, from a collab perspective, which I understand the collab organization better, well, build makes sense. I know they're spending a lot of time on developing Spark, building out their Cisco clouds, building out call manager, et cetera. So build makes sense. Buy, you've just touched on it. I mean, they've been buying a number of companies, most significantly probably for Cisco collaboration is Econo and Tropo. They also did that Sonata purchase. So they've been buying a lot of companies. Partner, they're really proud of their Apple partnership. I'm not so. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, but that's about it.
The Ericsson one's very meaningful though in the telecom space.
Which one?
Ericsson.
Oh, Ericsson's a big one. But in collab, I think the 2 big ones are Apple and Barely, but the bigger one, which they didn't even mention really on the keynote, is IBM. Yeah, and IBM's a big one for a couple of reasons, but that's probably too much right now. And then the 4th bucket was invest. I'm not confident of how many companies they're investing in from a collab perspective. The one that kind of comes to mind is Velo Cloud, which is an SDN technology, which I think could be very important to Spark. But it's also just a network. It's probably more of a networking play than a cloud play. And then I didn't really understand the last bucket, which was what they call co-develop.
Chuck admitted in the roundtable that in a way that's kind of it should fall into the first. But what they're doing is they're working with customers to build solutions that particular customer would want. So they're co-developing them with the customer, and then they'll take it to market from there. So instead of the customer having to build it themselves, Cisco will build it with them. In some ways, Cisco bears the expense of that, but then they can take it and monetize it after the fact. And so the thesis is, if one big bank wants this type of solution, then obviously all of them will, or at least a number of them will, and they can replicate that way. So,
okay, well, let's wrap up with some of the announcements. I actually don't have a master list of the announcements, so I'll just wrap off what I remember. Let's see. So the big one in the keynote was that the video room systems can now connect to Spark. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think that was, if you had understood the Spark strategy, you would have seen that coming. I didn't clearly understand it, but now it makes sense. But it certainly makes it much easier to deploy. I mean, it's literally plug and play now for customers. So I think that's a good way to drive Spark backend, Spark client, but also the room systems and make it easier.
You know, they showed in one of the keynotes. They showed. I think it was Jens took a video system. I forget which one it was. Pretty much out of the box, and configured it and had it working on Spark in very, very quickly. And what surprised me about that was that he put in a code. He had like a registration code that he got from his IT administrator, opened it up, turned it on, put in the code, and it came up, and that was pretty clean. What surprised me is that when they do it on the phones, when they do the Spark registration on phones, I thought it was very clever. They use a QR code, and they hold the QR code in front of the camera, and that registers it very quickly, and again, very elegant. I was surprised they didn't use a QR code with the video system. I mean, you've got the darn cameras, hold up a QR code to the camera. So I was surprised he put in the code.
Yeah, that may be coming.
Maybe coming. Maybe it was, yeah. Okay, another announcement was CareBot. Now, I didn't get any briefing on this. I heard people talking about it, and they announced it, but I don't know much about it. I think it's supposed to be more or less compete with some of the Spark bots, but I'm not.
Yeah, I think it's a customer care type of. You can put in robot, submit an inquiry, and you get a bot response back. I'm not.
I said that wrong. I'm supposed to compete with Slack bots, not Spark.
Spark, yeah.
Okay.
The thing with that, though, is I'd like to see that get simplified. There's only a handful of people in a company, I think, that really understand how to use bots. So
yeah,
something a little more natural.
I was really surprised how much stuff was going on that they didn't include in CSCape. And so, recap of all the announcements would have been nice.
Actually, that's true.
Another one that did get pretty good attention was a new SDK for video. This is, in my opinion, long overdue. In fact, I think it was back in Boca, so that must have been 3 years ago when Rowan kind of demonstrated the Spike Shop example where they had a video SDK that I guess maybe I'm confusing it with something else, but I know that they've been losing a lot of business to some competitors because they don't have a video SDK. They have all this great video conferencing equipment, but not a way to integrate it into applications very well. So they have announced, I guess, a beta release of a new SDK for video. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that was a good thing for them to release. It's my belief that the unified communication space is being modularized. And you look at the CPaaS space, right? Historically, companies bought their communications in one big platform. Then we moved it to the cloud. And now what we're doing is we're modularizing it so you can buy a little bit of voice, a little bit of text, and drop it into applications. Video certainly should be next. And when you look at what matters to Cisco, it's bandwidth, right? So the more video they can put in more applications in more places, it just drives more bandwidth, which is good for the largest Cisco.
And then the last two things that come to mind were not actual announcements; they were previews. They were previews of what's going on in the back labs, and it was nice that they showed that. The first one was, for lack of a better term, the big green button. Which
I didn't see that. Yeah.
Basically, it's the join button for audio conferencing. They've always had a good join button or easy one-touch join for video, but they haven't had a good solution for audio. And so this to me is just a correction of a competitive deficiency, and a lot of UC companies have it. What was nice in particular about it was that the big green button actually shows up on the phone. So if you're doing an audio conference on a Cisco phone, you can just push a button to join, as opposed to calling the lead number and then putting in the PIN code. So I consider that more of a correction than particularly innovative. The other one was much more innovative. They showed a preview of what they're calling Monica, which is a digital assistant that lives within Spark. And I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I've been spending some time writing a post on it. So I won't.
It's Alexa
for our conversation with all this. But did you have any quick thoughts on Monica?
Well, that's basically Alexa for enterprise, right?
Yeah, you can you can Alexa for enterprise, Siri for enterprise, whatever. So let me ask you: do you think there's a need for a Alexa or Siri for enterprise as opposed to a personal Alexa or Siri or Cortana or Google now?
Whichever one you want to use.
Yeah.
The answer is no and then yes. I think if we work the way we work today, probably not. But if you think of it from an IoT perspective, being able to turn machines on, turn machines off, get diagnostic information, things like that. If you could say to Monica or Alexa or whoever, tell me all my copiers that need service or something, and the tech can quickly write it down. I could see it being used in that case, right? So used to, the way we do it now, where tell me the weather, I can look on the computer. But I think in a larger analytic automation, from that perspective down, it probably makes some sense.
Yeah, I guess I think it's, one of the lines I use in my post is it's uncharted territory.
Yeah,
it has a lot of potential depending on how it gets implemented, and we've never had anything like a group digital assistant. It's always been a personal digital assistant. So a group digital assistant can do things that a personal digital assistant can't do, in theory, depending how it gets implemented. And so for example, one of the things that a real assistant does is find times, right? And the way we use our tools today, it's the way we find times, like on Outlook or even Google, is a time that we're both available, and that doesn't take any concept into priority. And when you have a real assistant, they might start making phone calls and say, well, this is more important. We need to move that appointment to make this appointment happen. And so it's interesting with a group business assistant if they could rearrange calendars, and make things like that happen. And when you start talking that way, you open a whole can of worms, as that can Monica change my calendar without my consent? I could see both sides to that argument. So anyway, I cover this in a post, but it's a really interesting idea. It's uncharted territory, and highly politically inappropriate when you're talking about assistants. But I think the idea has legs. I think it could work. So, okay, let's go ahead and wrap this up, Zeus. I really appreciate you taking some time with me to discuss some of these points. Anything I forgot to ask, or anything on your mind, or are we gonna...
I think the one other thing we saw there was Cisco flexed its security muscles. They had a number of security announcements day one. In fact, one of them, the Cloud Defense Orchestrator, uses machine learning, as we talked about, to be smarter. So they are clearly, like I said, they're trying to attack the security problem. And if you know Dave Geckler at all, the head of security and networking, is a very smart guy. He said to me when he took the job that, as GM of security, that industry average, the length of time it takes to find a breach is 100 days. Cisco now with Network as a Sensor can do that in 17 hours. And I said, look, Dave, man, that's 17 hours. The virus can be all over your company. And they said they're literally trying to get it down to minutes, if not seconds. And to me, machine learning is a big part of that. And I think what we saw with Cloud Defense Orchestrator was the very first instantiation of that. And I think we should expect to see more. But they rolled out a ton of security there, and obviously it's been a big driver of IT spend. It's a big problem for all companies, right? And they're certainly making waves in that space now.
So along that note, there was a lot of really important stuff discussed, and that was one of them. And there were a lot of stuff that was really important that wasn't discussed because there wasn't so much time and all that stuff. I was a little surprised on one thing that they discussed in lieu of other things, and how much attention they gave to corporate responsibility. You have a take on that one?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because they're not quota bearing. They don't sell products. I don't even think customers really think about it when they buy products. I will say though that making the world a better place was always a passion for John Chambers. It's something that, when they started Network Academy, it was to obviously train a bunch of engineers to do things the Cisco way, but they also work with Huawei gear, Juniper gear, Arista gear, right? It's really more. In fact, one of the quotes that Chambers used to say all the time was that there's two equalizers in life: the internet and the education. Cisco's maybe the most influential company in building the internet, and now they're trying to at least educate people in the areas of networking. And I've talked to the CSR group for a number of years, and they've got a number of wins, if you want to call it that. They're able to educate, say, women in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, where they typically can't work because they're women, right? But yet, with the Cisco certification, which is globally recognized, they can work for foreign companies remotely. And so they've impacted people's lives that way. And I think Karen Walker or Chuck said on stage that their goal is to impact 1 billion lives by 2025. And so we live in a very weird time right now with all kinds of problems. And Cisco is a company that's been largely spending its own resources to try and solve some of those big problems. And I know other companies do too as well. Microsoft is a big CSR group, so does Oracle. And I would like to see them make it part of their shows. I think it's an important thing to understand. And I think customers should appreciate those things when they happen, because it's not just, I'm not just making routers to sell you routers. I'm genuinely trying to make the world a better place. And it's the first time I've ever seen CSR get any kind of airtime at Cisco Live, but I think it was good to see.
There's a lot of airtime. I mean, and even more importantly, it was at the cost of it. Like we said, a little time in the expo hall would have been nice, or something. There was a lot of things that we didn't do. That we had a corporate responsibility reception. We had a corporate responsibility presentation.
They had a huge area in the show floor too. If you down
the other end. I don't know about
it. I went down there. It was enormous.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much, Zeus. I really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll be in touch soon.
It's a pleasure as always, Dave.
Thanks.